So we're going to now hear from Olena Zeitseva from Ukraine. Olena is a lawyer working as a gender equality expert and GBA plus expert from Ukraine. From February 24th, 2022, is engaged in anti-trafficking project in Ukraine, working on comparative study of international law norms related to fighting sexual exploitation. And the title of Olena's talk is War in Ukraine, Sexual Exploitation is Still Almost Invisible. Thank you so much for coming, Olena, and over to you.
My presentation will be related to war. Actually, I will be talking about women and women's rights. And as our previous speeches today showed, that it doesn't really matter what is the sphere and what is the topic. We are talking about women's rights violations, about silencing women, about limiting women, and it all tells us about the system we live in, and it's all about feminism, about our fighting every day against patriarchy. So today's presentation will be focusing on women's rights, but I will not only give some information, I'm really hoping for feedback and sometimes for support, for advice from all of you, because so many feminists from so different countries and all your opinions may be really valuable if we want to move forward. And the topic will be about sexual exploitation related to war and connected directly or indirectly to war that is happening now in Ukraine and the problem of silencing it. What is the main conclusion I would like to make for the first place? That yes, this problem is being discussed by Ukrainian government now. However, it's only limits to warning to potential victims. Discussions are around what types of victims, how can we inform victims, how can we help victims, and almost no more. But let me show it in details. First, I will stop on positive changes, which I can see during those 5 months of war. Then I will talk about the risks, and then maybe we can think about what we can all do. So what about positive developments? We did ratify the Istanbul Convention. It was a very, very long way because we signed it as a country. We signed it about 10 years ago, and there were several attempts to sign it, to ratify it, so it becomes legal in Ukraine, but it was stopped by the term gender, which is included in the text. And our so-called church unity organizations, they were very active and gained some PR points on pointing that this convention is actually pushing gender ideology. This story is very interesting by itself, but I will not stop on it. I will just mention a little bit later what benefits can this convention bring to the topic of helping survivors of different types of violence, including trafficking for sexual exploitation. What else is being done good is that we develop and discuss a plan to state anti-trafficking program. This program was actually drafted last year, but still is not adopted. And I think it's a good thing because now we can change it the way that it would be more answering to the needs of people during the war and to the needs of women, refugees, including refugees and victims of violence related to war actions in Ukraine, and helping them to avoid trafficking situation as well. Still, the program and the plan, we do not have direct dates when it will be adopted, but if it will, and if it will include the issue of demand, fighting demand, it will be maybe one of the most important documents that can be a first step of introducing the Nordic model in Ukraine. Another thing is that we are being told that our law enforcement agencies, for example, police, prosecution office, are starting to cooperate on anti-trafficking issues. It's too early to tell how successful this cooperation is, and we will see it later, but this tendency is really important, and that they are talking about it publicly, that they are cooperating with the aim to stop trafficking. And we do have state-level discussions, roundtables on anti-trafficking, but yet, as I mentioned, it's always about talking about victims and survivors. So we'll stop on it later. We do have NGO trainings, and this is actually related to Istanbul Convention, because Istanbul Convention envisages that we do need to have a certain amount of support centers in the country, according to the amount of the population. So we will have, and we already do have, help and support, including financial support from the state to the regions, to certain regions, to establish those centers, support centers. And so they will need personnel, and NGOs are actively engaged in training of personnel who will work with the survivors. The amount and the essence of the training is another issue. And some state institutions seems really closer to the idea of fighting demand as necessary for Ukraine. It's not anything official yet, but I do hear mentions of it, and I do see that some state officials are aware of this possibility and are considering it. So what are the risks and possible problematic moments now? This is maybe the most terrible thing and most important thing I would like to tell, is that we do not have enough rehabilitation centers, and certainly we do not have exit programs for survivors. And the risk here is that we will have these programs aimed at survivors of rapes from Russian soldiers, of other types of violence, gender-based violence, but not for survivors of prostitution. And this is very important, that we do integrate exit programs as a part of rehabilitation programs. We are trying to work hard to make it happen. And the next problem is the polarization of attitudes to prostitution. You know, we are not talking about prostitution as a violation of women's rights. Ukrainian society are talking about prostitution whether as a shame for women, whether as a right for women. So men are invisible, still invisible in this conversation. And it doesn't even matter if you leave a comment about pimps or somebody else. The discussion will always come to discussing women engaged in the prostitution. So it stops us from doing what we need to stop the demand. And there is emphasis on warnings on trafficking for labor exploitation, which is related that some organizations in Ukraine are mostly dealing with labor exploitation, and they have good connections with our state authorities, and they have the possibility to talk in mass media and to make public speeches, and they are talking about men. And this is really, really a shame as for me, because when I open a video which is named like helping Ukrainian refugees to avoid human trafficking, and when a representative from international organizations talks about men and helping men, and we know that 90% of refugees are women and children, this is really strange, and this is really not the way it should be, when we should focus on real potential victims, at least when we are talking about victims. And of course, we understand that men also can be victims, but in this situation, we should talk about men. We should talk about sexual exploitation, not making too much emphasis on the labor exploitation, which is really not so relevant in this situation of war that we have now. And of course, it's much easier to talk about enemies and blame enemies, for example, Russian soldiers, than it's to blame, for example, Ukrainian soldiers with the same crime, or Europeans, because Ukrainian soldiers are protecting Ukraine. So it's really hard to have a conversation in the public sphere that yes, there is exploitation of women among Ukrainian soldiers. There is exploitation of Ukrainian women and refugees and girls in Europe. Because it's much easier to say that, yes, we will see crimes and punish Russian soldiers as an enemy. But we should talk about all the cases, not only about crimes committed by the enemy. And we still have poor understanding of what fighting demand is. And as I should say, it's not only the fault of our state institutions. It's very strange, but I analyzed documents and recommendations issued by several very famous and very reliable organizations from the Europe, for example, Greta or OSCE or European Union. And I was trying to find there something about fighting demand, some actual recommendations related to how can we stop demand. And also some of these organizations have really good documents adopted, other documents related to fighting demand and conventions. In those documents related to Ukraine, no actual measures of fighting demand were mentioned, or at least listed, or at least given any reference to other documents. So we actually don't have anything to stop and to show our government as an example. For example, I would say that you can see this Greta recommendations. Please see, they do recommend us fighting demand, but what do they mean by it? Giving information and helping to survivors. These are not measures of fighting demand, it's other things. And it's a pity we don't have it in official documents. And the last, at least what I can say, it's a lack of experts on combating sexual exploitation. We do have a lot of great and prominent gender experts, and some experts, for example, Maria Dmitrieva, which you, I think, know, they do specialize in combating sexual exploitations, but there are not too many of them. There are really several people, and people who actually specialize even on gender-based violence or violence, sexual violence. They do not have enough expertise on sexual exploitation issues, and that's make them actually avoid this topic during any courses, presentations, webinars. So what can we all do? Of course, this is just what I can see. Maybe you can add something to it, but this is what I would like to tell. And first of all, is we need help with the developing of exit programs. Any help. It can be advice. It can be example of the programs. It can be some stories about success cases or failures. Anything we can. It can be official communications with our governments that we need such programs. It can be any manifests addressing this issue, whether on your websites or anywhere. We just need any help with this, any help we can get. And of course, we are in our countries and you are in your countries. We should continue pressing our parties, our governments, so that refugees need additional protection from sexual exploitation. I mean, of course, the vulnerability is mentioned when we talk about sexual exploitation or trafficking, but this link that refugees of war are vulnerable, this should be stated clearly. And better it would be officially stated in some documents. This is the easiest way to make it quite clear that any refugees of war is vulnerable. So involving him into prostitution or other type of sexual exploitation is actually trafficking. Until it's not, it's in separate documents, until it's not stated clearly in official documents, they can avoid, officials can make a way that they are not realizing this, that this is our vulnerability, or just ignoring this fact. And I would like to ask you to share information about the petition on the Nordic model that we do have appeared in June, and we have 90 days so that we can collect 25,000 signatures. it's only for Ukrainian citizens, but maybe you can advise on how to share the information with the petition, or maybe you have where to share it among Ukrainians or in other platforms. So we do really need the help in sharing the information. I will give a link to the petition and the link to this presentation as well. And what we also can do, not only do something ourselves, but also encourage others to help and support Ukraine, whether by sharing information, donations, sharing posts, any help is valuable, or going to some actions, public actions, protests, anything like this is helping Europe and other countries to remember what is going on, and that we do need protection, especially from violence against women, which is being silenced, as I mentioned. And of course, you can give support to Ukrainian women and girls near you. It can be any type of support, psychological, some kind words, just helping them probably to find information they need, to help them to get support they need because they have this language barrier, etc. It's up to you, but it's also really valuable. And several words about my project, because usually I do not include information like this in the presentations, but this is really connected to the anti-trafficking, and I'm proud of what we've done and what we are trying to do, and I really hope that why I'm sharing this, I really hope that maybe you would like to advise something, right? Maybe you can give some valuable information, and this is why I'm sharing my email, and for you to remember whom to share it with. And we did already done a lot. We had about 7 million of people who saw the information about risks of trafficking at the first weeks of the whole escalation of the war. We were the first to develop those list of risk situations. We checked with the help of our European organizations, with our feminist friends from Europe. We collected actual context of reliable NGOs, not just embassies or police, but NGOs that can give real support in case a woman is a situation of women trafficking, human trafficking, and sexual exploitation. And we are working on a chatbot that will link the survivors or any people who would like to help them to free services, because we do have several free services in Ukraine. And this is, of course, not all we do, but at least we are trying to do it. And as I mentioned earlier, we are working on that demand was not silenced. The issue of demand was raised loudly during the state meetings and roundtables and during the work of state authorities. And probably just some, I would say, emotional thing, that what we hope for in Ukraine as we live another day in this war. We hope that there is one less day until the victory of Ukraine, and I would like to add that I do hope that is one day closer to promoting women's rights and to getting us the Nordic model